The crash and first contact. The warning alarm screamed through the cockpit of the Star Runner as Captain Elena Rodriguez fought to keep her cargo vessel steady. Red lights flashed across every surface while her instruments spun wildly out of control. The hyperspace jump had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong, and now she found herself plummeting toward an ice-covered world that shouldn't exist in this sector. "Come on, baby, stay with me," Elena muttered through gritted teeth, her hands dancing across the controls with practiced precision. At 34, she had been flying cargo runs for 12 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Star Runner groaned and shuddered as it hit the planet's upper atmosphere, its hull heating up like a meteor. The planet below was a sheet of white ice stretching to every horizon. No signs of life, no cities, no landing beacons, just endless, frozen wasteland under a pale blue sky. Elena's emergency systems kicked in, deploying the landing thrusters and heat shields. She had perhaps 2 minutes before impact. Her cargo bay was filled with medical supplies destined for the outer colonies. Antibiotics, surgical equipment, water purification tablets, things people desperately needed. But none of that would matter if she didn't survive the next few minutes. The Star Runner hit the surface hard, skipping across the ice like a stone on water. Elena was thrown against her restraints as the ship carved a deep furrow through the frozen ground. Metal screamed against ice. Sparks flew from damaged systems. Then, finally, blessed silence. Elena hung in her pilot's seat, breathing heavily. Her head throbbed where it had struck the side panel and she could taste blood. But she was alive. The Star Runner's emergency power hummed quietly, and the cabin was still pressurized. Small victories. She unstrapped herself and stumbled to the environmental controls. The outside temperature read -47 degrees Celsius. The atmosphere was breathable but thin, with unusual energy readings that made her scanner fritz and spark. Whatever this place was, it didn't appear on any star charts, she knew. Elena pulled on her thermal survival suit and checked her equipment. Emergency beacon, food rations for 2 weeks, portable heater, and a pulse pistol. The beacon would broadcast for 72 hours before its battery died. Plenty of time for a rescue ship to find her signal, assuming anyone was looking in this forgotten corner of space. She activated the emergency hatch and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a physical blow, even through the insulated suit. The air was so dry it seemed to suck the moisture from her lungs. But what caught her attention wasn't the cold or the endless ice. It was the structures. Rising from the frozen wasteland like the bones of some ancient giant were crystalline formations that definitely weren't natural. They stood in perfect geometric patterns, each one exactly 30 meters tall and glowing faintly with internal light. The formation stretched as far as she could see, creating a vast grid across the landscape. Elena approached the nearest crystal formation, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Up close, she could see that the crystal wasn't solid. There were patterns inside it like circuit boards made of light. As she got closer, the glow intensified, and her scanner began beeping frantically before going completely dead. "Electromagnetic interference," she said to herself. "These things are pumping out enough energy to cook a small city." She walked between the crystal pillars, marveling at their perfect construction. No tool marks, no seams, no signs of how they had been built. They simply existed, as if they had grown from the ice itself. At the base of each formation were symbols carved deep into the frozen ground. Not human symbols, not like anything in the galactic database. A sound made her freeze. Not the wind which whistled constantly through the crystals. This was different. Rhythmic. Like footsteps, but not quite right. Elena drew her pulse pistol and crouched behind one of the formations. The sound came again. Closer now. But when Elena peered around the crystal, she saw nothing but empty ice and wind-blown snow. She was about to dismiss it as her imagination when she noticed the tracks, fresh indentations in the snow, leading from one crystal formation to another. But they weren't boot prints. They were too wide, too long, with what looked like claw marks at the front. And they were arranged in sets of 4, as if whatever made them walked on all fours but could rear up on 2 legs. Elena followed the tracks, her pistol ready. The trail led deeper into the crystal forest, winding between the glowing pillars in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, as if whatever made them wanted her to follow. The tracks led to a clearing where several crystal formations had been arranged in a perfect circle. In the center was a depression in the ice, smooth and bowl-shaped. At the bottom of the depression was an object that made Elena's heart race, a piece of metal, clearly artificial, with writing etched into its surface. But not alien writing. Human writing. Part of a ship's identification plate, scarred and pitted with age. The letters were barely visible, but Elena could make out enough to read, SS Prometheus, Urch Vessel, Missing, 2387. Elena knew that designation. The ESS Prometheus had been a deep space research vessel that had vanished 15 years ago. All hands lost, presumed destroyed in a hyperspace accident. But here was proof that they had made it to this frozen world. She picked up the metal fragment, and as her gloved fingers touched its surface, the crystal formations around her began to pulse with brighter light. The sound she had been hearing grew louder, more insistent, and then she saw them. At first, they were just distortions in the air, like heat shimmer on a summer day. But as Elena watched, the distortions began to take shape. Tall, graceful beings that seemed to be made of ice and starlight. Their forms shifted between solid and translucent, as if they existed partially in another dimension. There were 6 of them, arranged in a circle around the depression where Elena stood. They didn't move aggressively, but she could feel their attention focused on her with laser intensity. One of them, slightly taller than the others, stepped forward. When it spoke, the voice came not from its mouth but from the crystal formations themselves. "Human," the voice said, carrying harmonics that made Elena's bones vibrate. "We have waited so long for one of your kind to return." Elena kept her pistol raised but didn't fire. These beings had been here long enough to collect debris from the Prometheus, which meant they had been watching, waiting. If they wanted to harm her, they could have done so already. "Return?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "How long have you been here?" The beings exchanged glances that were somehow visible despite their translucent faces. The tall one answered, "We have been prisoners on this world for 3,000 of your years. The research vessel that came before you, their crew helped us remember what it meant to hope." Elena lowered her pistol slightly. "The Prometheus crew, what happened to them?" "They tried to help us escape," the being replied, "but they lacked the flexibility that your species is known for. They thought in straight lines, followed protocols. The systems that hold us here were designed to counter such thinking." Another of the beings stepped forward, this one smaller, more delicate. When it spoke, Elena could hear something like sadness in its harmonic voice. "We are the Zephyrians. Our world died when our star collapsed. We fled in great ships, seeking refuge among the stars. But the hegemony found us." Elena had heard of the hegemony in history classes, an ancient galactic empire that had collapsed over 2,000 years ago. They had been notorious for their brutality toward other species. They could not destroy us, the first being continued. "Our life force is tied to quantum frequencies that exist between dimensions. So instead, they built this place. A prison designed to keep us phased between realities, never fully existing in any one dimension." Elena looked around at the crystal formations with new understanding. "The crystals, they're some kind of containment field." "Precisely. The hegemony technology was sophisticated but rigid. It follows predetermined patterns, responds to expected behaviors. Your Prometheus crew tried to shut down the system using conventional methods. Logic, mathematics, systematic analysis. The system adapted to counter their efforts." Elena holstered her pistol completely. These beings needed help, not weapons pointed at them. "But you think humans might be able to do something different?" The third Zephyrian, one whose form seemed to flicker more than the others, spoke up. "Humans are unpredictable. You solve problems through intuition, improvisation, what you call thinking outside the box. The hegemony never encountered such minds. Their systems have no protocols for dealing with human creativity. Elena felt a familiar stirring in her chest. The same feeling she got when faced with a mechanical problem that everyone else said was impossible to fix. The same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had gotten her through flight school when everyone said a girl from the mining colonies didn't belong among the stars. "Show me," she said simply. The Zephyrians led her deeper into their crystal prison, their forms flowing, like liquid light through the geometric maze. As they walked, they told her their story. They had been explorers once, scientists and artists who traveled between dimensions, studying the nature of reality itself. When their son died, they had used their knowledge to preserve their entire civilization in quantum suspension, waiting for a new home. Instead, they had found the hegemony, and the hegemony had found them a threat. "Your species intrigues us," the tall Zephyrian said as they walked. "In our observations of the Prometheus crew, we learned that humans possess a unique combination of intelligence and adaptability. You don't just solve problems, you reimagine them entirely." They emerged into a vast chamber carved from the ice itself. At its center stood a massive crystal formation, easily 100 meters tall, pulsing with energy that made Elena's teeth ache. Thousands of smaller crystals surrounded it, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The primary containment matrix," Elena breathed. "This is what's keeping you trapped." The Prometheus crew spent months trying to understand its function, the smaller Zephyrian said. They mapped its energy flows, analyzed its programming, created detailed schematics, all logically sound approaches. Elena walked around the massive structure, her engineer's eye taking in its construction. She didn't try to analyze it systematically like the research crew had. Instead, she let her intuition guide her, looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for anything that didn't quite fit. "What if," she said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "The trick isn't to understand the system at all." Alliance and escape. The Zephyrians exchanged what Elena had come to recognize as their version of surprised glances. The tall one, who had introduced himself as Vexhai, flickered more brightly. "Explain," Vexhai said, his harmonic voice carrying notes of curiosity. Elena grinned, feeling that familiar rush of an idea taking shape. "Look, I'm not a scientist. I fix things. And the first rule of fixing things is that sometimes the complicated solution isn't the right solution. Sometimes you need to hit it with a hammer." She gestured toward the massive crystal matrix. "Your Prometheus friends, they were researchers, right? They tried to figure out how this thing works so they could shut it down properly. But what if the hegemony built it to resist exactly that kind of approach?" The smaller Zephyrian, who had given her name as Silandra, moved closer to Elena. "You suggest a more direct method?" "I suggest chaos," Elena said, pulling out her scanner and pointing it at the base of the nearest support crystal. Even damaged, it was still picking up massive energy readings. "This thing is a machine, right? And machines break when you overload them in ways they weren't designed to handle." Elena had spent her childhood in the mining colonies, where equipment failures could kill entire families. She had learned early that sometimes the difference between life and death was knowing when to throw the manual away and improvise. Her instructors at flight school had called it reckless. Her fellow pilots called it miraculous. She just called it being human. "The hegemony built this prison to contain beings who think in quantum dimensions," Elena continued, her mind racing as the plan came together. They probably accounted for every possible logical approach to escape. But they never met a human cargo pilot with a busted ship and a bad attitude. She turned to face the Zephyrians fully. "I need to know everything about your natural abilities. Not the technical stuff, just what you can actually do." Vexhai's form solidified slightly as he concentrated. "We exist partially between dimensions. We can phase through solid matter, manipulate quantum frequencies, and share consciousness across vast distances. And the prison stops you how? The crystals create a field that locks us into a single-dimensional frequency," Silandra explained. "We become trapped in this reality, unable to access our natural abilities." Elena nodded, pieces clicking together in her mind. But you're still connected to each other, right? I can see you talking without words. Yes. That connection remains, though weakened. Good. Elena walked over to her emergency pack and pulled out a collection of tools and spare parts. Here's what we're going to do. The Prometheus crew tried to shut down the system cleanly. We're going to break it in the most spectacularly messy way possible. She began sorting through her supplies. Emergency flares, power cells from her scanner, the magnetic resonators from her ship's navigation system. Not exactly cutting-edge technology, but Elena had learned long ago that the best solutions often came from making do with what you had, the eye. Crystal Matrix maintains the prison by keeping all the containment fields synchronized, Elena said, more to herself than to the Zephyrians. But what happens if we introduce random interference patterns? Not organized resistance, just pure, chaotic noise. The third Zephyrian, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. The system would attempt to compensate to maintain synchronization. Exactly. And if we hit it with enough random interference from enough different sources? Elena grinned. It'll have to choose which frequency to lock onto. It can't hold all of you in the same dimensional space if it can't figure out what that space is supposed to be. Vexhi's form brightened with what Elena interpreted as excitement. Your plan is to confuse the prison into releasing us by accident. More or less. The hegemony never dealt with human engineering before. They built this thing to counter logical, systematic approaches. They never considered someone might try to break it by accident on purpose. Elena began rigging her improvised devices. Around the base of the central matrix, the emergency flares would provide thermal chaos. The power cells would create electromagnetic interference. The navigation resonators would add gravitational distortions to the mix. None of it was designed to work together, which was exactly the point. I will need your help, Elena said, connecting her devices with lengths of cable salvaged from her suit's heating system. When I trigger this mess, you need to use whatever connection you still have with each other to amplify the chaos. Don't try to control it, just make it bigger and more random. Silandra moved to stand beside Elena as she worked. You are risking your life for beings you met only hours ago. Why? Elena paused in her work, considering the question. Because it's the right thing to do. Because you've been trapped here for 3,000 years, and everyone deserves a chance. At freedom, and because... She smiled. Because someone told me it couldn't be done. The Zephyrians worked alongside Elena, their translucent forms moving with fluid grace as they helped position the jury-rigged devices. Despite their advanced knowledge, they followed Elena's lead without question, trusting in human intuition over their own sophisticated understanding. Your species continues to amaze us, Vexhi said as they completed the setup. The Prometheus crew worked for months and never considered such an approach. That's because they were thinking like scientists, Elena replied, making final adjustments to her chaotic array. They wanted to understand the problem before solving it. But sometimes you don't have time to understand. Sometimes you just have to act. She stepped back to survey their work. It looked like a disaster waiting to happen, which was perfect. Mismatched components connected by improvised wiring. Each device calibrated to interfere with the others as much as with the crystal matrix. Everyone ready? Elena asked, her hand hovering over the activation switch. The Zephyrians arranged themselves in a circle around the central matrix, their forms beginning to resonate with anticipation. Elena could feel the energy building between them, their quantum consciousness preparing to embrace the chaos she was about to unleash. Activate it, Vexhi said. Elena pressed the switch. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Lights flashed in colors that didn't have names. The air filled with harmonics that made Elena's bones vibrate. The crystal matrix began to pulse erratically, its perfect synchronization shattered by the cacophony of random interference. The Zephyrians cried out in their harmonic voices, but it wasn't pain. It was joy. For the first time in 3 millennia, they felt the prison's grip on their dimensional frequency beginning to weaken. Elena's improvised devices were burning out one by one, but they had done their job. The containment field was failing, overwhelmed by patterns it had never been designed to counter. The hegemony's perfect prison was dying, killed by human imperfection. "It's working." Silandra's voice was pure music now, her form beginning to shift between dimensions again. "We can feel ourselves becoming unstuck from this reality." But the system wasn't giving up without a fight. The crystal matrix began drawing power from backup sources, trying to re-establish control. Elena realized that her sabotage was only a temporary measure. "Can you get to your ship?" she shouted over the growing chaos of failing containment fields. "Yes," HFY replied, his form now flickering rapidly between solid and translucent. "But it will not function. We have been trapped too long, forgotten how to adapt our technology to changing circumstances." Elena felt that familiar stubborn spark ignite in her chest. "Then we'll adapt it for you." "Where is it?" The Zephyrians led her through passages that were becoming increasingly unstable as the prison failed. Reality itself seemed to be coming apart at the seams, with corridors that led in impossible directions and gravity that changed from moment to moment. They emerged into a vast hangar carved from the living ice. At its center sat a ship that took Elena's breath away. It was beautiful in an alien way, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to shift like liquid metal. But it was clearly dead, its exotic systems dark and silent. "It has not been active for 3,000 years, HFY explained. "Our technology is highly advanced but inflexible. Without the ability to phase between dimensions, we cannot interface with our own systems." Elena walked around the ship, her engineer's eye taking in its construction. It was nothing like human technology, but machines were machines. They all followed certain basic principles. "What does it need to fly?" she asked. "Dimensional resonance," Silandra said. "The ability to exist partially outside normal space-time. It is how we travel between stars." Elena nodded, understanding. "And your prison stops you from accessing that ability. But what if we don't need you to access it? What if we can trick the ship into thinking you can?" She began climbing over the vessel, looking for access panels or interfaces. She found what looked like a control node, a crystalline structure similar to the prison's components but smaller and more elegant. "Your ship is built to respond to your natural dimensional abilities," Elena said, pulling out her last functioning power cell. "But it's still just a machine. Machines can be fooled." She began connecting her power cell to the ship's control node, using techniques she had learned jury-rigging mining equipment. It was crude compared to Zephyrian technology, but crudeness was exactly what they needed. "The prison is failing," Elena said, watching the hangar walls begin to flicker with dimensional instabilities. "When it does, you'll have maybe minutes before the hegemony's backup systems kick in. I'm going to send a massive power surge through your ship's control system. It won't give you real dimensional abilities, but it might fool the ship long enough to get you out of here." She made the final connections and stepped back. "Trust human engineering one more time." HFY and his companions moved toward their ship, hope and fear mixing in their harmonic voices. "We trust you, Elena Rodriguez. Your species has shown us what we had forgotten in 3 millennia of imprisonment." "What's that?" "That sometimes the impossible is just another word for no one has tried the right kind of crazy yet." Elena triggered her improvised power surge, sending raw electrical energy through systems designed for quantum resonance. The ship shuddered, lights flickering across its hull in patterns that shouldn't have been possible. And then, miraculous, it lifted off the ground. The Zephyrians rushed aboard, their forms solidifying as they interfaced with their newly awakened technology. Elena watched from the hangar floor as they took control of systems they hadn't touched for 3,000 years. "Elena!" Silandra's voice called out from the ship's communication system. "Come with us. You have given us our freedom. Let us share the galaxy with you." Elena looked back at the failing prison, at the crystal formations that were beginning to crumble as their containment fields collapsed. Then she looked at her own damaged ship, sitting somewhere in the ice above. "I can't," she called back. "My ship, my cargo. People are counting on those medical supplies." And someone needs to report this place, make sure no one else gets trapped here. The Zephyrian ship rose toward the hangar's opening, which was beginning to widen as the prison's structure failed. But before they left, Vexhi's voice echoed through the chamber one last time. You have shown us that the best solutions come not from perfect knowledge, but from perfect determination. We will not forget this lesson, or the human who taught it to us. Elena watched the elegant alien vessel disappear into the pale sky above. Around her, the prison of the hegemony finally died, its crystal formations crumbling into harmless ice. She was alone again, but not truly alone. Somewhere among the stars, an entire civilization was free because one human cargo pilot had been too stubborn to accept that some things couldn't be fixed. She began the long walk back to the Star Runner, already planning the repairs she would need to get home. Behind her, the ruins of an ancient prison settled into silence, leaving only broken crystals and the proof that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to refuse to believe it's impossible in the first place. In the distance, her emergency beacon had begun transmitting again, its signal clear and strong in the absence of the prison's interference. Help was coming, and Elena had quite a story to tell them.